They say there's no such thing as an original thought. Well, I believe the same applies to cooking and recipes, because recipes are not invented out of thin air. In reality, they're just remixes and tweaks of old recipes, where certain ingredients were replaced out of necessity or to change things up. And in this video, I want to show you how you can take a basic recipe, like this bechamel I'm making, and transform it into something that's completely your own. Alright, what is a bechamel? If you have a culinary education, you'll know this is one of the most foundational sauces, because so many recipes are based on it. But all it is 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 tablespoon of flour, and 1 cup of milk. Cook the flour in the butter until it is golden, and then add your milk. Usually a bechamel is seasoned with salt, and I'm just adding a big pinch, as well as some nutmeg. But to be quite honest with you, I have no idea what this does. But yeah, I just stirred that in, and you know it's ready when you can swipe through the sauce and see where you swiped. Just don't burn your finger like me. Alright, what are we doing with this bechamel? Like I said, so many recipes are based on this sauce, and one of those recipes is Alfredo sauce. In fact, all you need to do to turn this into Alfredo is add mozzarella cheese. But suppose you didn't use mozzarella and instead used cheddar. Well, then you're just making a mac and cheese sauce. Add some jalapenos and salsa to that, and now you have a queso. Bechamels can also be used for soups, or even baked dishes like lasagna. But for us, we're just making a classic pasta dish. So I added a few spoonfuls of pasta water, and now the sauce is relatively thin so that I can add my pasta. And I just thinned it out so it would coat the pasta easily. If I were to make a queso, I probably wouldn't thin it out at all. But once again, that's for you to experiment and try out on your own. I'm just seasoning this with black pepper and oregano, but add whatever you want and season to taste. Alright, all that's left to do is plate this up, and we have successfully turned our bechamel into a white sauce Alfredo pasta. Now, I've had this a million times and it tastes great, but let me show you how I was able to take this recipe and invent a completely new pasta sauce for my Instagram series, just by replacing a few ingredients. Will it pasta sauce? That is the question we are answering today as we take this coconut and make it the star of our pasta dish. Okay, I've written out our bechamel recipe, and we're gonna see how I turn that into a South Indian coconut Alfredo with very few changes. Right now, I'm turning that bechamel recipe into an Alfredo recipe because we already know that a bechamel plus mozzarella cheese and pasta is an Alfredo sauce. Now let's watch and see how I turn this basic recipe into a completely different flavor profile with very few changes. Coconut into small pieces and threw that into a blender along with my coconut water as well as some regular water. And I just blended that as well as I could, and effectively we've made shredded coconut and coconut milk. But for this recipe, we're just using coconut milk because we're gonna make an Indian style coconut fettuccine. So I'm adding some ghee, some curry leaves, and some mustard seeds for an Indian style bechamel. Alright, so we're using ghee instead of butter. That makes sense. Ghee is made of butter. And we're also using mustard seeds and curry leaves so we can get rid of the oregano and black pepper. Then I cooked my aromatics, added some flour, turned it into a roux, cooked that until it was brown, and it was finally time for the coconut milk. Coconut milk instead of milk, that makes sense. I only add a little bit at first to make sure it incorporates. Then I added chickpea flour, as well as the rest of my coconut milk. Here I'm using chickpea flour to thicken the sauce. Once the milk incorporated fully, I added some salt and some mozzarella cheese. And life hack, turn off the heat whenever you do this so the cheese doesn't split. Once my sauce was smooth, I finally added my pasta, stirred that in, and since it was looking a bit thick, I added some extra pasta water, stirred that in, and finally our pasta is ready. All that's left to do is plate it up, and it's time for our taste test. I'll spare you the details, it tasted really good. But here is our coconut Alfredo recipe. I know I haven't changed the name of the recipe, and the instructions are the same as before, but at the end of the day, this is still an Alfredo sauce, and the same instructions are followed even if the ingredients are different. Yeah, you have to make a few minor tweaks, but you should be doing that even whenever you follow a recipe, where you make minor adjustments for your taste, because after all, you're eating the food, right? But anyways, here's our South Indian coconut Alfredo. Not that different from a bechamel. Making your own recipes does not have to be as cookie cutter as a bechamel or Alfredo sauce. And I think oatmeal is a perfect example of that because every single step is customizable. Like right now I'm adding milk, but you could also cook it in water. I'm using both, but literally any liquid works. And you can flavor it however you want. I'm using cinnamon and I'm gonna add maple syrup later. One time I accidentally added cumin instead of cinnamon. Was not that bad, although I did have to fix it up. What I'm saying is that oatmeal is a great way to experiment with your food. Cooking the oatmeal itself is a great way to experiment as well. I use the microwave for convenience, but you could use the stove. You could also do overnight oats. Another thing you can customize is the consistency and the texture of the oats. The more liquid you add, the more you have to cook the oats, and they'll turn out softer as a result. At the same time, the longer you cook them, the thicker your oats will turn out. That's why I like using the microwave, because you can stop the cooking immediately and get the exact consistency you want. Here I'm using maple syrup as a sweetener. You could use honey or sugar. You know, oats don't even have to be sweet. Sometimes I'll make it with taco seasoning and cheese, but that might be an acquired taste. I like to add protein to my oats, which is what I'm doing right now, and is probably one of the most popular toppings for oats. When you stir in protein, you have to be really patient. This was like a minute and a half of stirring condensed in 10 seconds. And we could serve oatmeal like this, but let me show you another way on how to make it. For this version, I'm going to show you how to cook fruit in your oatmeal, so it kind of tastes like a pie. For this one, I'm roughly dicing an apple because I'm going for an apple pie flavor. And I just added directly to my oats, along with some cardamom and cinnamon, mix it all up. And I'm only going to add water to cook this because milk might split from the acid in the fruit. Alright, we're going to cook this like any other oatmeal, and we don't have to worry about the apples because they'll just boil in the water. So just like last time, the longer you cook this, the softer your apples will turn out, and the more water you add, the longer you'll have to cook it. So I actually added less water than usual because I prefer firmer apples, but you'll figure out your preferences the more you make it. Once again, I'm adding protein, and stirring it in never gets easier in my opinion. I know it looks like cement, but that's just something you have to accept if you want to get your protein in. Anyways, I'm adding honey to this, and by adding fruit to our oatmeal, we have made apple pie protein oatmeal. But once again, this is one of a million ways on how to make it. Here's a flowchart I made to demonstrate the possibilities of making oatmeal. As you can see, there are 3 main ways to cook them and a million ways to flavor them. Feel free to screenshot this flowchart if you need ideas for your oatmeal, but to be honest, when you cook enough and get familiar with many different ingredients, recipes will start looking like this to you. And ultimately, every time you replace an ingredient or figure out how to do it on your own, you will have invented your own recipe. Thank you for watching and subscribe for more.